Are you excited to walk? In December of last year, so 2022, I chose to do a 30-day carnivore experiment. Well, technically 31 days, because December has 31 days. And the reason that I chose to do it, there were several reasons, but the primary reason is I was really always very curious about the carnivore diet. I know a lot of people that I've seen do it on social media. I attend health conferences around the country, and frankly, in my nutritional therapy business, I've actually put some of my clients who have severe digestive and other health issues on carnivore for 30 days or more to see if we could heal what was going on with them. So I thought, this is something that I recommend for clients from time to time. I need to actually try it and see if it's going to work for me. And more importantly, what do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And what are the benefits, if anything? So I've read The Carnivore Cure by Jody Cho. I've read Carnivore Code by Paul Saladino. There are a lot of different books out there. I have carnivore cookbooks. And I thought, how hard can it be to just do it for 30 days? So I'm gonna give a full recap about all of the things that I experienced during those 30 days. But it was fun and exciting and challenging and annoying and all the different things. So I felt a range of emotions over the course of the month. So I have a quick request for you guys before I start this, which is if this video is of value to you, or if you think there's someone else that may like it, please share it. If you could like it, I would love for you to like it. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna put out more content like this that's really informative and educational, that takes you through my journey and some of the things that I do with my clients, so I can help educate more people and really help you guys thrive. So thank you so much for liking and subscribing. I really appreciate it. Really what I wanna talk about in this video is, I wanna talk about the advantages to doing carnivore, at least from my experience, because again, I only did it for a 30-day experiment. I wanna talk about the disadvantage for doing carnivore, again, through my experience, and then why someone might consider to do this and why they might not. I did a lot of research online before I decided to do this experiment, and there were several different warnings, so to speak, about what you might experience. So for example, everyone said, well, you're gonna notice some changes digestively when you do this experiment. So that was 1000% true for me, and I'm gonna get into that in a second. But before I do that, I want to tell you all of the things that I was really excited about in this experiment. So when I started on December 1st, I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? And then I got over that pretty quickly by saying, hang on a second. All you have to do is eat meat. So it's really not that hard. There are a lot of theories out there about carnivore that the easiest way to start it, especially if you're starting it because you have some sort of underlying autoimmune condition, you have some sort of major digestive stuff, some reason you might do it, you would start it by literally just doing beef, salt, and water. So I thought, okay, I could do that, but I also like a variety of foods. So I chose to start with a mix of proteins and meats that I was already eating. And so depending on the day, I just did a lot of different stuff. So I ate beef patties a lot. I ate different kinds of cuts of steak. There were several days where I had bacon. And I also ate chicken and turkey and salmon and shrimp. So I did all sorts of different meat, poultry, and fish in my carnivore experiment. That allowed me to have some variety in terms of meats, so I wasn't getting really sick of eating the same thing all the time. And I was a little worried that I was gonna have some palate fatigue, but the reality is, by being able to eat chicken and bacon and turkey and salmon and shrimp and beef, I felt like I had a pretty good variety. I did notice, however, though, as the month went on, I did start to get some palate fatigue. So I'd say that was one thing, just in terms of difficulty that I experienced, is rather than feel like super excited that I was eating a different kind of meat or a different kind of fish, I was like, oh, I really wish I could have those nut butters, or I really wish I could have that random apple or some other really healthy real food, item that I couldn't eat. For example, avocados. I missed avocados terribly because I love avocados, and that was a really difficult thing for me in terms of what I wasn't able to do. There were 3 primary benefits for me in doing this carnivore experiment, or at least I experienced 3 primary benefits. Now there are plenty other reasons to do a carnivore experiment and plenty of other benefits you can get from it, and I'll talk about those in a second, but for me, these were the primary benefits. Number 1, I found meal prep and mealtime very simple. So many of you have heard of the story of how Steve Jobs only wore black pants and black turtlenecks because he had no decision fatigue whatsoever in terms of his wardrobe, because he was making so many other decisions in terms of his daily life. So I really found that in the carnivore experiment in terms of food. So I didn't get a lot of decision fatigue because it wasn't like I had this overwhelming number of choices to eat from. It was either beef, bacon, some kind of fish, turkey, etc. So I was choosing from the same small group of things. So decision fatigue was not there, and the simplicity of being able to do it was great. And that includes, by the way, eating out at restaurants. It was very easy to eat out at restaurants. You can just order a burger with no bun, no nothing else. You can just order steak, you can just order fish, you can just order chicken. So that was really simple. And then number two, I would say the second benefit for me was I really liked the fact that it allowed me to have a modicum of control over the holidays where I didn't totally go off the rails. So a lot of times, especially in December, because there's so many different temptations, this was something that allowed me to stay really strict and just do it for 30 days and prove to myself that I could do it for 30 days. December, traditionally, and I'd say a little bit of November and maybe creeping into January, are some of the most difficult months of the year when it comes to people making nutritional choices. So having this kind of rigidity in terms of my nutritional choices by only being able to eat meat was excellent. So that was also great. And then third, I'd say the other third primary benefit for me was I genuinely, for the whole entire month, for the most part, felt like really, really flat in terms of my abdominal digestion and really lean in my abdominal area. So there are lots of different foods that can cause people to bloat. And for some people, it could be a variety of different kinds of vegetables. For other people, it's grains. For other people, it's dairy. But for most people, if they really pay attention to how they feel after they eat, there are for sure certain foods that make us feel bloated or just not have an optimal digestive process. So I really liked, and again, just quick three, simplicity of it, including eating out at restaurants, the fact that it was very rigid over the holidays, so that was huge for me, and then also the fact that I felt really lean and had, you know, my great six-pack during the holiday time because I wasn't experiencing any bloat whatsoever. Other reasons people might try to do a carnivore experiment for either 30, 60, 90 days or even longer than that are things that I don't personally experience, but I know that they are ways or reasons that someone who wants to overcome these kinds of issues may choose to do carnivore. And I'll give you three examples. Number one, carnivore is excellent for healing and helping people overcome a variety of different autoimmune conditions. I've heard of people overcoming everything from rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, eczema, all sorts of different skin conditions and digestive conditions, and of course, a variety of arthritic conditions. Those conditions can be alleviated. I've seen anecdotal examples everywhere, and there's also clinical research to support that carnivore diets can heal those kinds of conditions. I don't have any of those autoimmune conditions, so if I did, I'm sure I would be motivated to stay with carnivore a lot longer. But since I'm not dealing with any of those things, that wasn't one of the benefits that I experienced, but I know it is for a lot of other people. Okay, number two, another thing is, a lot of people transition to carnivore or are recommended to do carnivore because they have extraordinary digestive distress, meaning they have H. pylori, they have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or they have some combination of these or other calamities happening in their intestines. And in order to clear out all of the noise that's happening in their gut, they really have to do the most strict elimination diet ever, which would be to eat all meat. So I've seen a lot of people have success in this way in terms of healing whatever digestive issues they have going on. I have had my own journey with my digestive stuff over the years, but I've really worked very hard over the last several years to have pretty excellent digestive health. So that wasn't something I was struggling with or dealing with in terms of needing to do the carnivore diet. But again, considering that's the number two thing, that would be another reason people might consider to do carnivore. And then third reason is, and I see this a lot out there in the social media world and elsewhere, I've met people that have used this, carnivore can be an excellent tool for overcoming either food addiction or reversing obesity, reversing type 2 diabetes. So any sort of excess of food, whether it's from an addiction or simply a person became obese, carnivore can really help reverse that. And so I also wasn't dealing with any of those issues. So for me, that's not one of the benefits I received. If you have any of these issues, meaning autoimmune conditions, severe digestive issues, or food addiction or other obesity or just a lot of excess body fat, carnivore may be a great thing for you to try. The other thing that I want to talk about a little bit is what were some of the negatives to doing this experiment. So unfortunately for me, I would say overall, I had probably more negatives than positives. Now, I'm someone who loves meat. I'm still eating meat. I already ate meat today. I will always eat meat. But I learned several things about my body and myself personally in terms of doing this experiment where that was the only thing I was eating. So I'm gonna give you 4 cons. There probably were a few others I can think of, but these are the 4 primary ones, and so I'm gonna focus on those. Number 1, I didn't actually have awesome energy during the whole month. So I expected, because of what I hear online, and I hear a lot of people talking about how they just have boundless energy once they transition to a carnivore diet, I thought my energy would get better. I already have a lot of energy. I haven't even had caffeine since July of 2022, so I've been off caffeine for a really long time, and my energy actually decreased instead of increased. Now, I have several different theories of that, but the primary theory that I think makes the most sense for me is when I chose to do this carnivore experiment, I didn't focus very heavily on making sure I was in ketosis. So for those of you who don't know what it takes to be in ketosis, you really have to consume 75% or more of your calories from fat, ideally closer to 80 or more, because if you have your calories from fat that high each day and you keep your protein at 20% or lower, 20% or lower, you should be in ketosis most days, and certainly after a few days of eating that way. Now, I really love protein, and when I eat meats, and when I was doing this carnivore experiment, I found it very difficult for me to ever get below 30% protein. So I was eating a lot of protein, like 30 to 40% protein some days. And so what that means is I wasn't in ketosis, I was in this kind of no man's land area where your body really wants to use fat for fuel, but you're giving it too much protein. So now it has to do something with this extra protein. And I'm pretty confident that my body was probably engaged in gluconeogenesis with all of that excess protein many of the days, maybe even gluconeogenesis from all that excess fat, but something in terms of my protein to fat ratio and the fact that I was eating virtually no carbohydrates for an entire month really affected my energy. So that I did not love. Another thing in terms of a con is that and I mentioned something about this earlier, but by the time the month got further, I really was getting frustrated with the variety. So I felt like it really lacked variety. I was starting to miss a lot of the other things I used to eat, even a bunch of vegetables, a bunch of fruits, even just being able to dress up meals with some different sauces and things. So towards the end of December, I started to add different truffle sauces or mustard, or I even added olive oil to some things just to get some extra fat. Again, going back to the issue of the energy, I thought, well, maybe if I keep increasing my fat, my body will switch over to being in ketosis, and then I'll feel better instead of being in this no man's land of too high of protein, but like literally 0 carbohydrates. I mean, I think my carbs most day, because I tracked my food the entire month, I think there were between 4 and like 10 grams each day. And that was just from, there's a carb here in this piece of bacon and things like that. But I really was virtually having no carbohydrates. So again, energy levels, and then I was lacking in variety, and I really started to get palate fatigue from always eating meat. Third, and this one was very interesting to me because I did not expect this, and I did a lot of research about it during the month. I had some pretty wild water retention. Okay, so why would I have water retention? How did I know that? Well, number one, I started to notice it a little bit in my cheeks as the month went on, which I thought was interesting, but I wouldn't have even paid attention to that if it wasn't for how tight my Oura ring was. My Oura ring was tighter in the month of December than it had ever been. And what that told me was I was retaining a fair amount of water in my fingers, and I could feel it when I tried to take my Oura ring off because it was really, really difficult for me to get it off to even charge it. And I thought that was very unusual. So that's called edema when you're retaining water, and there's a lot of different theories for that. But I was doing some online research. I see an acupuncturist, and I was talking to him about it. He was pretty confident that it was because I may have been eating too much protein, which would make sense in terms of what I was sharing with you earlier about energy levels. But the difficulty for me in accepting that that was the reason for all of my edema is that I've eaten way more protein than that in the past. In fact, when I got ready for my first bodybuilding show, I had to eat 200 grams of protein a day. And I only weigh about 130, 135, depending on the week. And so that's way more than my body weight. And I tolerated that level of protein very well. However, I think I tolerated that level of protein very well because I was eating it in every single meal at that time with vegetables, with a cup of celery, with a cup of green peppers, with a cup of cucumber, with some kind of green vegetable with that protein, which has a lot of really good fiber, which would slow the digestion of that protein. So I think that this whole edema that I was experiencing could have possibly been from eating too much protein with the absence of fiber, okay? And I was, again, eating too much protein and then, of course, not upping my fat, so that I was in that no man's land in terms of energy. The other thing in terms of the water retention is, and this could very much be another thing I was experiencing, is a lot of times when people go carnivore, their electrolyte balance is off. So the sodium to potassium to magnesium to calcium to chloride ratio that they have in their body can be off, and that can cause them to suffer from dehydration. Now, I was really smart when I did carnivore, and I was adding salt to everything. I use Redmond's Real Salt, which is excellent. I use their Relight electrolytes, and I did use that during my carnivore experiment. So I'd really be surprised if for me it was an electrolyte imbalance issue, but it had to be caused by something. And since I've started eating normal food in January again, it took a few days, but all of that water retention has subsided and gone away, and I feel like my body is back in balance. So I've given you 3 things, which were energy levels as a con. I had low energy. Number 2, it lacked variety. And number 3, I had this whole issue of the water retention, which was not awesome. And now I want to kind of summarize the cons with talking about the most significant one, which I've saved the best for last, which was number 4, my digestion. So TMI, I can't believe I'm going to say this on YouTube, but here we go. I experienced and suffered from diarrhea the entire month of December. Sorry, it's true. And not only that, but it's like watery. So it was my body really struggling with how to process all this protein and fat with the absence of fiber. And so that's not ideal, okay? So lucky for me, I wasn't traveling in December, thank God. But you really can't be that far away from your house. So I don't recommend it if you're dating, if you want to have a life, if you want to work outside the home, if you want to travel. Like, those things were kind of difficult for me. So what I was finding I was doing is I would end up fasting a ton until I knew I could have a meal and then be home the rest of the day, because you really can't be that far from a bathroom. And I know that sounds so sick. I was within 2 weeks saying, I can't believe I'm going to last a whole month doing this. But everything I was reading online was like, well, if you experience diarrhea when you go carnivore, it usually will end by about 2 weeks. It'll end by about 3 weeks. Just stick it out. You got to hang in there. So I hung in there, and it never, ever went away from me. In fact, I chose to deviate from carnivore for only 2 days in December. So on Christmas Eve and Christmas, when I was with my family, we had our Christmas dinner. So I ate Italian meatballs, which obviously are still meat, but I had zucchini and red sauce and things I didn't eat for the rest of the month. And then on Christmas Day, I had my dad's homemade Belgian waffles, which he always makes on Christmas morning, and I chose to have those. And I think that night we had prime rib, so I still was eating meat again. But even after going off carnivore for those 2 days, my digestion resolved within 24 hours after. And then the second I went back onto carnivore, again, the diarrhea started. So there are a lot of different theories as to why this may happen. And I had 5 or 6 different working theories. So one of them is, and this is one of the theories, so if you experience diarrhea when you go on carnivore, one of the theories is that you could have a lot of bacterial die-off happening in your intestines that's causing the diarrhea. So could that have been it for me? Maybe, but again, I have really good digestive health, so I'd be surprised if I had that much die-off happening. Now, bacterial die-off could happen simply because, keep in mind, when you're eating just meat, now that's the only thing you're eating to the exclusion of everything else. And any bacteria that you had in your intestines that was feeding off Brussels sprouts, that was feeding off apples, that was feeding off pasta, that was feeding off whatever it is that you're eating, all of those bacteria would have to die because they no longer have a food source. So there's certain bacteria that eat those kinds of foods, certain bacteria feed off meat. So in other words, it's possible that anytime someone goes carnivore, they do suffer some amount of die-off. But there's no way that I had bacterial die-off for a full month. That's, in terms of my gut health, that doesn't make sense. So one of the other working theories is, well, you're eating too much protein. And I alluded to this before when I said I was having a difficult time keeping my protein under 30%. It mostly was creeping 30, 35, even 40%, which is a lot of protein with no fiber. So it is possible for me that it was that the protein was just running right through me, so my body wasn't even absorbing a lot of the amino acids from the protein, which is of course why we eat protein in the first place. So it could have been that, and that would also explain if that was creating some stress and my kidneys were just having to work harder to clear that protein. It would make sense why I was having the edema. So I do think it's most likely that protein in the absence of fiber, again, for me, not necessarily for anyone else, but for me, makes a huge difference in terms of protein in the absence of fiber. for me just didn't work. I mean, it didn't work. Another working theory, in addition to die off and too much protein, is okay, well, you're eating too much fat. Well, that also doesn't make sense for me because I eat tons of fat anyways. I mean, I've been low carb ketogenic for many, many, many years now. So that didn't make sense to me. But it's also another reason that people could experience some sort of digestive distress or diarrhea on carnivore. So that's another working theory. And then another reason that you could be experiencing diarrhea goes back to what I was just sharing about the edema, which is your sodium electrolyte balance could be off. And so because of that can cause diarrhea as well. And then there's another theory that I came across online that I also don't think was true for me, which is that you can experience diarrhea if you're doing a ton of oxalate dumping. And oxalates are found in a variety of different foods. The primary one that you'll find if you do any research about it is spinach. So I always tell people, if you're going to eat spinach, please only eat it cooked. Don't eat it raw, because raw spinach contains a high degree of oxalates. And so you end up having a lot of oxalates in your system. And if you do any sort of detoxification, you can end up dumping those oxalates. So you really reduce the oxalate content in foods if you cook the food first. So just word to the wise about spinach. Hi, girl. She wants to say hi. So those are a bunch of the different theories on why you might get it. I have heard of people who do carnivore. I actually talked to someone like this who said he tried to do a 30-day experiment with carnivore and he had such bad constipation that he couldn't deal with it after like a week or two. He had to quit because it was just too painful, which I imagine would be. I had the opposite problem. So the fact that I lasted for 31 days, I'm pretty impressed by, minus the 2 days that I did something different, which was over Christmas Eve and Christmas. So in summary, in terms of all those cons, those to me, because the diarrhea was so life-altering in a way, because it really mattered as to how close I was to the house, that was not worth it for me. Now, I wondered often, well, if I stuck it out 60 days, if I stuck it out 90 days, if I did carnivore longer, would I have gotten past that point? Would I have gotten better? I think the answer is probably yes. Now, I don't know that to be certain. I did try to play with increasing my fat and decreasing my protein a few days to see if it would get better. But the reality is I didn't give it long enough to determine whether that would actually be something that would have fixed the issue. I very much like eating variety. I very much like having choice in my food. And I really have figured out for sure for me with this experiment that my body likes fiber. Okay, so I really think fiber combined with protein and fat, which is how I recommend people eat anyways, is for me the way to go, and I think it just makes people feel really good. For me, it's made me feel the best. So all in all, even though there was some benefit, even though it was really simple, even though it was easy to eat out at restaurants, even though it made grocery shopping easy, I feel like for me, the digestive stuff, the energy, and the edema just were not worth it for this 30-day experiment. If I had an autoimmune disease, if I had food addiction, if I had other things that were causing me to feel very unwell eating a variety of foods, I would absolutely try to stick carnivore out for something closer to 60 or 90 days and see if I could push past all the negatives. I also would work on making my fat to protein ratio to be more 80-20 instead of 60-40 or 70-30, because I think that also was a difficulty for me. So those were some of the things I learned in terms of what I would do differently. And I hope if you tried to do carnivore experiment yourself, that these tips and tricks that I've given you are helpful.